The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock is the third of our dramatic monologues, and it is by far the most complex. It's the one that we're going to spend 2 class periods on instead of 1, and it is worthy of and deserves more time than we're going to give to it. For me personally, it's the most complex and elusive poem that I know, and I've been familiar with this poem since like 1980. I first read it when I was in 8th or 9th grade because I was reading a really bad book called The Chocolate War. Don't read it. But a theme in that book was, do I dare disturb the universe? Which is one of the questions that T.S. Eliot asks in this poem. Nevertheless, in the last 30 years, I've reread and I've studied and I've gone back to and I've tried to teach this poem, but the poem is difficult to grasp. And it, even for me, especially for me at least, the poem changes meaning and evolves as I change and I evolve. I feel like as time passes, sometimes I'm a little bit more worthy to appreciate it or understand it. But at other times, I feel like maybe I got it better when I was in my 20s. The first important thing that you guys need to get, and what all English teachers say when they're teaching this poem, is that it is stream of consciousness. That's by far the most important stylistic device. And the second most important stylistic device is allusions. The allusions, and there are so many allusions in this poem, I can't even count them. There are at least a dozen, probably more, and some of them are obscure. Some of them are allusions to Dante. There are more than one. Some of them are allusions to Shakespeare, and I see some of the Henry plays, and I see some of Twelfth Night. There's clearly an allusion to his coy mistress, that Andrew Marvell poem that you guys have read. And there are allusions to Hamlet, especially that line about, if I were a crab, I could crawl backwards. And there are other names that get dropped, like Michelangelo. The first discovery I made, and I must have made it in college, was who he's talking to. The poem begins with, "Let us go then, you and I." And for me, the poem first started to make some sense when I realized that the speaker of the poem is, and this is my opinion, speaking to himself. I had in college this vision of him speaking to himself in a mirror. And I say that now as I'm speaking to myself in my phone. It's weird. But he's doing this thing. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. And I think if you take that as the point of view, this man talking to himself, because in the first half of the poem, what he's trying to do is build up courage. And in the second half of the poem, not sure where the halfway mark is, the tone is going to change. And that question, do I dare disturb the universe, is going to change to, I'm not going to disturb the universe. He goes from asking very big questions to asking very small questions, like, should I comb my hair behind, or should I roll up the legs of my trousers? For me personally, this is a profound poem. I've written that I think, and this is my belief, I think this is the most profound statement on human loneliness that I've ever read. I can't think of something more significant. And there's a link, and for me it feels like a male thing, but it's probably not. It's this link between human loneliness and human cowardice. J. Alfred Prufrock, no matter what else he is a coward. He's afraid to talk to people. He's afraid to approach people, especially women. J. Alfred Prufrock is not in love with a woman. He refers to the women in plural. And he says things like, I've known them all already. I've known them all. but he has this vision of women and who they are and what they are, and he feels separated from them, really because of his own cowardice. Do I dare? Do I dare? The poem begins, well, first I want you to consider the name, J. Alfred Prufrock. It is a pretty unmasculine name. It's kind of a nerdy, dorky name, J. Alfred Prufrock. He just doesn't have a cool name. And it's his love song, and this is not a love song by any stretch of the imagination. It begins with a passage from Dante's Inferno, and I'm not going to read the whole passage or any sort of translation, and I don't think you should think about it very much either. But the speaker of the passage is literally in hell. And the person that he's talking to is saying, well, I'm going to tell you these secrets because we're all stuck in hell and nobody ever gets out of hell. That sets the mood for the poem just exactly right. I want you to think about the imagery in the opening stanza of the poem. The speaker, speaking to himself, says, "Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table." Etherized, unconscious, looking like they're dead. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets and the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, of sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent, to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. He's going somewhere, and the place he's going, he has to walk through these seedy areas of town to get there. And then you get a couplet that it is its own stanza, and it gets repeated in the poem. In the room, the women come and go, speaking or talking of Michelangelo. Now, everybody knows who Michelangelo is, and everybody knows the great things that he accomplished. All those statues in Florence and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo is no ordinary man. There's something great and profound about him. But the reason he's in this poem is he's exactly the opposite of J. Alfred Prufrock. I mean, it doesn't say in the poem, but he's probably an accountant. He's probably a nobody. He probably works in a cubicle. There's nothing special about him. What follows is a few passages that use a lot of cat imagery. I really want you to pay attention to what the cat's doing, and he refers to it as the fog, but the fog moves like a cat. Now, T.S. Eliot did write a children's book called The Old Possum's Book of Cats or something like that, and that's where we get the play, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical Cats. It's where we get that movie Cat, but you can ignore all of that. He does use this cat imagery though, and the fog moves with the cat imagery. I'm not gonna read the poem with you. I'd like you to listen to Anthony Hopkins. He reads it better than I do, and you should follow that to get a sense of the whole poem. But I do want you to think about the philosophical question that gets asked here. Do I dare? Do I dare disturb the universe? And as he's asking that question, he is thinking about things like the bald spot in the middle of his hair. And he thinks about how his hair is growing thin. As you get older, it happens. It's awful. And he talks about his morning coffee. J. Alfred Prufrock says that he measures out his life with coffee spoons. They're those little tiny things. Ultimately, he's going to tell you that his life is small and simple, and there shouldn't be much to it. And he's going to mention women over and over again. I've always had the feeling that in the poem, he's just lonely. And what he wants to do is go up and talk to these women or have relationships with these women or be the lover of these women. But one of the things I always feared when I was a very young man is, for example, asking a girl out on a date. Hey, would you like to go to the movie with me? And having the girl say something like, you mean on a date? And J. Alfred Prufrock sort of writes that into the poem. It's like, that is not what I meant at all. I didn't mean that at all. So what you have is this guy who's very handicapped or crippled by his fear of rejection. Now you should, while you're reading this, look for that moment when he changes the tone. The first half is him trying to build up courage. But he's not a great man. He says it quite bluntly. He's going to say, I'm not Prince Hamlet. I grow old. I grow old. And because that's who he really is, that's how his the poem ends with him never bothering to really do something to stop his loneliness.